The groom's smirk was ice-cold as he pointed his ex-wife to the very last row. "Back there where you belong." Then the church doors opened, and 3 identical little boys in tiny tuxedos ran straight to him, screaming, "Daddy." If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The cathedral smelled of lilies and old money. Julian Hawthorne stood at the top of the aisle in a midnight blue bespoke suit, greeting guests with the practiced charm that had made him the most sought-after architect in the city at only 35. His smile was perfect, symmetrical, expensive. But his eyes kept flicking to the heavy oak doors every time they creaked open. He was waiting for her. Across town, in a modest 3-bedroom apartment that still smelled faintly of baby powder and coffee, Livia Moreau knelt on the living room rug, trying to wrestle a tiny bow tie around the neck of a squirming 4-year-old. "Mommy, will Daddy be happy to see us?" asked Noah, the boldest of the triplets, his dark curls exactly like his father's used to be before Julian started taming them with product. Livia's fingers froze on the silk. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. It's a special day." Behind Noah, Ethan and Lucas were building a Lego tower that looked suspiciously like the cathedral they were about to enter. They had no idea their father had designed it. They only knew the picture on Mommy's nightstand, the handsome man who sometimes sent birthday cards with money but never came to birthdays. Livia stood, smoothing the emerald green silk dress she'd bought secondhand and altered herself. It hugged curves she'd earned carrying 3 babies at once, curves Julian used to worship with his hands and mouth. 5 years ago he'd told her those curves embarrassed him in public. Today she wore the dress like armor. She looked at her sons, identical down to the dimple in their left cheeks, and felt the familiar ache in her chest. Julian had signed away his rights the day the judge granted her full custody. He'd wanted a clean slate for his new life. Today he was marrying Cassandra Whitmore, daughter of the Whitmore Development Group, the deal that would finally make Hawthorne Architects untouchable. Livia had received the invitation 2 months ago. Thick cream cardstock, gold foil. A single line handwritten on the RSVP card in Julian's sharp script. "Back row. Don't make a scene." She'd stared at it for hours, tears falling onto the gold lettering until it blurred. Then she'd gone online and bought the Bentley. Not new, an older Mulsanne, midnight blue to match the suit she knew he'd be wearing. She sold the last of her mother's jewelry to afford it. She wanted him to see exactly what his pride had cost them both. Back at the cathedral, Julian greeted Cassandra's uncle, a senator, with a firm handshake and a joke that made the older man roar. Inside his stomach was in knots. He told himself it was nerves about the merger, the vows, the future. Anything but the possibility that she might actually show up with proof of the life he tried to erase. The organ began the prelude. Guests took their seats. Julian's best man, Tristan, leaned in. "You sure about the seating thing, man? Kinda harsh." Julian's jaw tightened. "She left me, remember? Took everything. She doesn't get to sit up front like nothing happened." Tristan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The doors opened again. This time it was her. Livia walked in alone first, chin high, the emerald dress catching every shaft of stained glass light. Conversations hushed like a wave moving through the pews. Phones lifted discreetly. She felt every stare like needles, but she kept her eyes forward, locked on the man at the altar who had once promised her forever. Julian's face went white beneath his tan. Then the triplets burst in behind her, 3 tiny hurricanes in matching navy suits, shouting over the organ music. "Daddy? Daddy, look. We match you." Noah reached him first, crashing into Julian's legs with the force of a small missile. Ethan and Lucas piled on seconds later, arms wrapping around his thighs, faces upturned in pure joy. The entire cathedral gasped as one. Julian stood frozen, staring down at 3 perfect miniature versions of himself. 3 boys he'd never held. 3 boys whose existence he'd paid lawyers to keep quiet. Cassandra, waiting in the bridal suite, had no idea the wedding had already shattered. Livia stopped 10 feet away, close enough for him to see the faint scar on her lower abdomen, the one from the emergency C-section when the boys tried to come too early. The one he'd never visited her in hospital to see. "Hello, Julian," she said softly, voice carrying in the stunned silence. "You wanted me in the back. But my sons wanted to give their father a hug on his special day." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The Bentley was parked outside. The boys were clinging to his legs like they'd never let go. And for the first time in 5 years, Julian Hawthorne couldn't think of a single perfect thing to say. The organ had stopped mid-phrase. 400 faces turned like one creature, breath held. Only the triplets' delighted giggles echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Julian's knees buckled slightly under the sudden weight of 3 small bodies. Noah's tiny hand had already found his. Ethan was patting his thigh as if checking he was real. Lucas had buried his face in Julian's trousers, leaving a perfect streak of chocolate from the emergency candy Livia had bribed them with in the car. Julian looked down at them, then up at her. Livia stood motionless in the center aisle, emerald silk glowing like a forest fire under the rose window. Her eyes, those hazel eyes he used to drown in, were steady. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just waiting. Julian opened his mouth. Closed it. The microphone clipped to his lapel crackled with his ragged inhale, broadcasting his panic to every speaker in the cathedral. Cassandra's maid of honor appeared at the side door in a panic, whispering loudly, "Jules," the bride's asking why the music stopped. He couldn't hear her. He couldn't hear anything except the blood roaring in his ears and 3 little voices chanting, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," like a heartbeat he'd never known he had. Noah tugged his hand harder. "Mommy said you were busy building big houses, but we missed you so much we came anyway. Are you surprised?" Surprised. The word was laughably small. Julian dropped to one knee, the expensive wool of his trousers pooling on the marble. He was eye level with his sons now. 3 sets of hazel green eyes, exactly like their mother's, stared back at him with absolute trust. Ethan reached out and touched Julian's cheek with sticky fingers. "You look like our picture, only sadder." Julian's vision blurred. He blinked hard, furious at himself. He would not cry in front of 400 people. He would not. But Lucas, the quietest, leaned in and whispered loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear, "We brought you drawings for your new house. Mommy said you're getting married, so we made one with 4 bedrooms. One for each of us." He pulled 3 rolled-up sheets from his tiny jacket pocket, crayon masterpieces of stick figures labeled Daddy, Mommy, Noah, Ethan, Lucas under a lopsided roof. Julian took them with shaking hands. The paper smelled like fruit snacks and hope. Behind him, Cassandra's father, Reginald Whitmore, stood up in the front pew, face the color of raw steak. "Hawthorne, what the hell is this?" Julian didn't turn around. Couldn't. Livia finally moved. 1 step. 2. Until she was close enough that he caught the faint scent of her perfume, orange blossom and vanilla, the same one she wore the night he proposed on the rooftop of his first completed skyscraper. She spoke so softly only he and the boys could hear. "I didn't come to ruin your wedding, Julian. I came because they asked me every single day for 4 years when they could meet their father. Today they're old enough to remember. So I gave them today." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Just once." Then louder for the room, "I'll be in the back like you asked. Come on, boys." She turned to leave. Noah's face crumpled. "No. Mommy, I want to stay with Daddy." Ethan started crying instantly. Lucas followed, big silent tears rolling down round cheeks. The sound of 3 heartbroken little boys ricocheted through the cathedral like gunfire. Julian felt something inside his chest rip wide open. He stood so fast the boys stumbled. Without thinking, without calculating the cost, he scooped all 3 into his arms, 2 under each arm like footballs and Lucas against his chest. They were heavier than he expected, solid and warm and real. "Stay," he said, voice raw. Then louder, to the entire stunned congregation, "Everybody stay exactly where you are." He looked straight at Livia. "You're not sitting in the back. None of you are." Reginald Whitmore barked, "This is absurd." Julian spun, eyes blazing. "I said everybody stays." He faced Livia again. The boys were clinging to his neck now, legs dangling, snot and tears soaking his collar. He didn't care. "Livia." He couldn't finish. There were no words big enough. Instead he shifted Lucas to his hip and extended his free hand toward her, palm up, trembling, an unspoken plea. The cathedral held its breath. Livia stared at his hand like it might burn her. For a long moment, the only sounds were the triplets' sniffles and 400 people forgetting how to breathe. Then she placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, something electric surged between them, 5 years of rage and grief and longing, all of it alive and crackling. Julian closed his fingers around hers like a drowning man grabbing a rope. From the bridal suite came the sudden, sharp sound of a door slamming. Cassandra had heard everything. But Julian didn't let go of Livia's hand. Not this time. When was the moment you realized pride was costing you the people you loved most? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. The side door to the vestry burst open like a gunshot. Cassandra stood framed in it, veil already torn half off, eyes wild with mascara-streaked fury. The cathedral's hush shattered. Julian. Explain. Now. 400 heads swiveled from the bride to the groom holding 3 toddlers and his ex-wife's hand. Julian's grip on Livia's fingers tightened involuntarily. The boys, sensing danger the way children always do, went very still against his chest. Livia tried to pull away. Let go. This is your wedding day. No, he said, too loud, too desperate. Not anymore. Cassandra marched down the side aisle, heels stabbing the marble like accusations. Reginald Whitmore intercepted her halfway, murmuring furiously about optics and contracts, but she shook him off. She stopped 5 feet away, staring at the triplets as if they were ghosts. Those are yours. Her voice cracked on the last word. Julian couldn't speak. He just nodded. Cassandra laughed, high and brittle. 5 years. 5 years you let me believe you never wanted children. That it was just us, building an empire, no baggage. And you had 3 sons you hid? Noah, brave Noah, lifted his head from Julian's shoulder. Are you the new lady Daddy was gonna marry? Cassandra's face crumpled. She looked suddenly very young under all the couture and rage. Julian found his voice. Cassandra, don't. She held up a trembling hand. Don't you dare say you're sorry in front of them. She turned on Livia. And you couldn't let him go, could you? Had to bring them here like some cheap soap opera twist. Livia didn't flinch. They're not a twist. They're his children. I gave him the choice to be in their lives years ago. He chose money and silence. The words landed like slaps. Julian felt every eye burning into him. Phones were out now, no longer pretending to be discreet. Tomorrow this would be everywhere. You should have cared. You didn't? He set the boys down gently, kneeling again so they were eye level. Listen to me, okay? Daddy needs to talk to some grown-ups for a minute. You stay right here with Mommy. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. Lucas started crying again. You said that on the phone last Christmas and then you didn't come. The sentence was a knife straight through Julian's ribs. He cupped Lucas's wet cheek. I was wrong. I'm here now. He stood facing Cassandra. We need to talk. Privately. She laughed again, colder. No. We're doing this right here, since you apparently love an audience. Reginald tried again. Cassandra, darling, the merger is off, she snapped. I'm not marrying a liar in front of God and Twitter. She yanked the 3-carat ring off her finger and threw it. It pinged off Julian's chest and rolled under a pew. Then she looked at Livia one last time, something broken behind the anger. You win, she whispered and walked out. The great doors boomed shut behind her. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Julian turned back to Livia. The boys clung to her legs now, confused and frightened by the shouting. He took 1 step toward them and she took 1 step back. Don't, she said quietly. Don't you dare think one dramatic moment fixes 5 years of absence. I know, he rasped. I know I don't deserve. You don't. Her voice shook, but her spine was steel. You signed the papers, Julian. You paid me to disappear. You told the judge you wanted no visitation, no financial responsibility beyond the lump sum, because children would compromise your brand. Remember? Each word was a hammer. He remembered. God, he remembered signing those papers in his glass corner office while his lawyer praised his clean break. He remembered telling himself it was mercy. Livia struggling alone with triplets would ruin her life and his reputation. He remembered the lie he'd lived every day since. I was a coward, he said. The admission echoed. I was terrified. My father drilled into me that weakness was fatal, that love made you poor. I thought if I cut you all out, I'd finally be free. He laughed, a hollow sound. Turns out I've been poor as hell. Tristan, the best man, cleared his throat awkwardly. People are filming. Julian didn't care. He looked at the boys. Ethan was sucking his thumb, something he only did when he felt unsafe. Lucas had both arms around Livia's thigh like a koala. Noah was staring at Julian with a mixture of hope and suspicion no 4-year-old should ever have to feel. Livia bent and scooped all 3 boys into her arms, staggering slightly under their combined weight. We're leaving, she announced to the room. Enjoy the reception you paid for, Julian. The open bar is excellent. She started down the aisle. Julian panicked. Livia, wait. She kept walking. He chased after her, past rows of whispering guests, past the discarded ring glinting under pew 12. Outside, the Bentley idled at the curb, driver holding the door. Sunlight flashed off its polished hood like a taunt. Julian caught her wrist just before she reached the car. Please, he begged, voice breaking in front of valets and photographers who'd materialized from nowhere. Don't leave like this. Not again. She looked down at his hand on her skin, then up into his eyes. "You don't get to beg now," she said, soft enough that only he heard. "You beg me to have the abortion. You beg me to sign the NDA. You beg me to take the money and vanish. I'm all out of mercy for you, Julian." She slid into the back seat with the boys. The door closed with the solid thunk of German engineering. The Bentley pulled away. Julian stood in the street in his ruined tuxedo, watching the taillights disappear, while strangers filmed the wreckage of the life he'd built without them. What's the worst thing you ever did out of fear instead of love? Be brave and share below. Sometimes just saying it out loud is the first step to fixing it. The rain came down in sheets, sudden and biblical, as if the sky itself had decided to punish the day. Julian stood soaked on the cathedral steps, watching the last guests scatter to their cars when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single photo. The Bentley, sleek in midnight blue, wrapped around a city bus on Lakeshore Drive. Front end crumpled. Steam rising from the hood. Emergency lights painting everything red and blue. His heart stopped. He was running before he registered moving, shoes slipping on wet marble, tie flapping like a surrender flag. He flagged the first taxi he saw, threw 500s at the driver and barked the intersection. The scene was chaos. Police cruisers and ambulance onlookers under umbrellas. Julian shoved through them, breath sawing in his throat. He spotted the boys first. Noah, Ethan, and Lucas sat on the wet curb in their tiny tuxedos, huddled together under a paramedic's silver blanket. Their faces were pale, streaked with tears and rain, but they were breathing. They were whole. Livia stood a few feet away, arguing with a police officer, emerald dress plastered to her skin, hair dripping. A cut above her eyebrow bled steadily. Julian reached the boys in 4 strides and dropped to his knees in a puddle. "Daddy." Noah launched himself at Julian's chest, the other 2 right behind. He clutched them so tightly Lucas squeaked. "Are you hurt? Tell me where it hurts." Ethan pointed to a scraped knee. Lucas lifted his arm to show a tiny bruise. Noah just buried his face in Julian's neck and sobbed, "Mommy wouldn't let go of us when the car spinned." Julian looked up. Livia was watching him, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. The officer was explaining something about road conditions and the bus running a red light, but her eyes never left Julian. He stood, still holding all 3 boys somehow, and walked to her. "You're bleeding," he said stupidly. "It's fine." Her voice was hoarse. Airbags deployed. Seatbelts. Car seats. Bentley took the hit. "We're lucky." The word hung between them like an accusation. The paramedic approached. "Ma'am, we really need to get you and the kids checked at Children's Hospital. Protocol with minors." Livia nodded, exhausted. Then she looked at the totaled Bentley being loaded onto a flatbed and laughed once, broken and bitter. "I don't have a car anymore. And I sold everything to buy that one." Julian didn't think. "Take mine." He turned to his driver, who had miraculously followed the taxi. "Kiss. Now." The sleek black Maybach pulled up. Julian opened the back door himself. Livia hesitated. "Julian." "Please," he said. "Let me do one thing right today." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded once. They rode in silence, boys asleep against both of them within minutes, exhausted from adrenaline and tears. Julian stared at Lucas's tiny hand curled around his thumb and felt the weight of 4 years of missed bedtimes crash over him. At the hospital, they were ushered into a private pediatric ER bay, courtesy of a nurse who recognized Julian's name and face from the society pages. Blood work, X-rays, stitches for Livia's forehead. Everything mercifully minor. Then the social worker appeared. "Miss Moreau, because there was a police report and the children were involved, we have to ask about custody arrangements." Livia went very still. Julian stepped forward before she could speak. "I'm the father. I have joint legal custody. The previous termination was a mistake. Paperwork is being corrected as we speak." He looked at Livia, pleading with his eyes. "Right?" She stared at him, stunned. The social worker raised an eyebrow. "I'll need documentation." "My attorney is emailing it now," Julian lied smoothly. He would make it true before sunrise if he had to forge the damn papers himself. The social worker left to verify. The curtain closed. Just the 5 of them in the small room, monitors beeping softly. Livia sat on the bed, boys curled like puppies around her. Julian stood awkwardly by the door, soaked suit dripping on the linoleum. She spoke first, voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just rewrite history because you feel guilty tonight." "I don't want to rewrite it," he said. "I want to live the rest of it. Properly." She shook her head. "You don't get to swoop in after one accident." That's not what this is. He took one careful step closer. I'm not leaving this hospital without you. Any of you. The roads are flooded, hotels are booked from the wedding guests. My penthouse has 4 empty bedrooms and a pediatrician on speed dial. Stay the night. One night. If you still want me gone tomorrow, I'll sign whatever you want and disappear again. But let me keep you safe tonight. Thunder rattled the windows. Noah stirred in his sleep, murmuring "Daddy," and reaching out blindly. His little hand found Julian's wet sleeve and held on. Livia looked at that small trusting grip, then at Julian's face, raw with terror and hope. She closed her eyes. When she opened them they were wet. One night, she said. The relief that crashed through Julian nearly took him to his knees. He lifted Lucas gently into his arms, Ethan climbed onto his hip like a monkey, and Noah refused to let go of Livia's hand. Together, soaked and battered and trembling, they walked out into the storm toward the waiting car. For the first time in 5 years they moved in the same direction. Have you ever been forced to share space with someone you swore you'd never forgive, and something shifted anyway? Tell me about it below. You never know who needs to hear they're not alone tonight. The penthouse was too quiet after the storm. Julian carried the boys one by one to the guest wing, 3 identical sleepy heads lolling against his shoulder. Livia followed with their tiny shoes in her hands, afraid to make noise in this museum of glass and marble that had once been her home too, before he'd erased her from it. He laid them in the biggest guest bed, side by side like matching dolls. Noah clutched the crayon drawing he'd rescued from the wreckage of the Bentley. Ethan's thumb was back in his mouth. Lucas curled into Julian's pillow and whispered, "Smells like you, Daddy," before sleep took him completely. Julian stood over them for a long time, afraid to move, afraid breathing too hard would make the moment vanish. Livia touched his elbow. They'll be out for hours. Adrenaline crash. He nodded, then led her down the hallway he hadn't walked with her in 5 years. Past the kitchen where they used to dance barefoot to jazz at 3 a.m., past the terrace where he'd proposed under fireworks. Everything was the same and completely foreign. In the living room, city lights shimmered through floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain still streaked the glass like tears that refused to stop. Julian poured 2 glasses of water with shaking hands. Whiskey felt wrong tonight. Livia took the glass but didn't drink. She walked to the bookshelf, the one he'd designed himself, and pulled out a slim leather album she knew would be there, because it had always been there, hidden behind architectural awards. She opened it. The first photo, her at 26, 8 months pregnant, belly huge with triplets, laughing on this very terrace while Julian kissed the stretch marks on her hip. Next page. Ultrasound printouts labeled baby A, B, C. Next. Hospital bracelets, tiny footprints in ink. She turned the pages slowly, each one a landmine. Julian watched her face crumple. "I never threw it away," he said, voice rough. "I couldn't." She closed the album like it burned. "Then why did you throw us away?" He sank onto the charcoal sofa, elbows on knees, head in his hands. "Because I was my father's son," he said to the floor. "He beat into me that real men don't get trapped. That love is a liability. When you got pregnant, 3 babies, Livia, 3 at once, I panicked. The firm was finally getting noticed. Whitmore was circling. I thought, if I kept you, I'd lose everything I'd bled for." He looked up. Tears tracked openly down his face now. He didn't bother hiding them. "I convinced myself you'd be better off without me dragging you through the mud of building an empire. I paid lawyers to make me the villain so you'd never look back. I told myself the money would give you freedom." Livia laughed, a broken sound. "Freedom? I was 27 with 3 newborns and no one to hold them when I had to shower. I worked 2 jobs while they screamed in a daycare I couldn't afford. Freedom tasted like formula and panic attacks at 4 a.m. She set the album down and walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. Julian stood, crossed the room, stopped just behind her. Close enough to feel her warmth, far enough that she could step away. "I have something else to show you," he whispered. He opened the drawer of the console table, the one she used to keep spare keys in, and pulled out a thick folder. Inside, bank statements, trust funds and 3 names, Noah Julian Hawthorne, Ethan James Hawthorne, Lucas Henry Hawthorne, each seated with millions growing untouched for 4 years. Beside them, college funds, medical funds, a life insurance policy naming Livia sole beneficiary. And letters. Dozens of them, one for every month he'd been gone. Sealed, never mailed. Livia's hands shook as she opened the top one, dated the day he signed away his rights. "My loves, today I did the worst thing I will ever do. I told the judge I didn't want you so that you could have a life without my poison. I lied. I want you so much it's killing me. I'm building something big enough that one day you'll never have to worry about money again. When it's safe, I'll come find you. If you can ever forgive me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Daddy. Tears dripped onto the paper, smearing the ink. She opened another. And another. Birthdays he'd marked alone with bottles of bourbon. First steps he'd watched on the private investigator's monthly photos. The day Noah lost his first tooth, Julian had driven to the apartment at 2 a.m. and sat in his car across the street just to catch a glimpse of the tooth fairy pillow in the window. Every milestone, every ache, documented in his handwriting. Livia's knees gave out. She slid down the glass wall until she sat on the floor, letters scattered around her like fallen leaves. Julian knelt in front of her, careful not to touch. I was waiting until the boys were 18, he said, voice cracking. Until I was powerful enough that no one could ever hurt you again. I thought that would make it right. I thought time would fix me. She looked up at him, eyes red. They needed their father at 4, Julian. Not at 18. I know. He swallowed hard. I know that now. Silence stretched, thick and aching. Then Livia reached out and touched the scar on his left hand, the one he'd gotten the night he punched a mirror after signing the papers. Her fingers trembled. I hated you, she whispered. Every night I fell asleep hating you. And every morning I woke up loving you anyway. That's the part that almost destroyed me. Julian made a sound like a sob being born and caught. She kept going, voice raw. I bought that Bentley with the last of my mother's jewels because I wanted you to see I wasn't the broken girl you left. I wanted you to hurt like I hurt. And then you held them, and I saw your face when they called you Daddy, and I hated myself for still wanting you to choose us. He bowed his head until his forehead rested against hers. I'm choosing, he said against her skin. Right now. I choose you. I choose them. I'll burn the firm to the ground if that's what it takes. Just, don't make me live the rest of my life without you. For the first time in 5 years, Livia let herself lean into him, just a fraction. The smallest surrender. It was enough. What's the letter you never sent that still lives in your chest? If you're brave, type even one line of it below. Sometimes the paper needs to feel it before you can let it go. The rain had softened to a whisper against the windows by the time they moved to the kitchen, the only room in the penthouse that still felt human. Julian found 2 mismatched mugs, one with a chipped handle, a relic from their old apartment he'd never been able to throw away, and made hot chocolate the way Livia used to when nightmares woke her at 3 a.m. during pregnancy. Real cocoa, whole milk, a pinch of cinnamon, tiny marshmallows melted on top. He set the mug in front of her on the island. She wrapped both hands around it like it was the first warmth she'd felt in years. They didn't speak at first. Just breathed the same air. Julian leaned against the opposite counter, watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. I used to practice saying your name out loud when no one was here, he said finally, voice low. Just to remember how it felt in my mouth. Livia. Liv, baby. I'd stand right here and whisper it like an idiot so the silence wouldn't swallow me. She looked up, eyes glassy. I stopped saying yours. The boys asked too many questions. But I never changed my emergency contact. You were still there. Julian Hawthorne. Father. Like a ghost I couldn't delete. He laughed once, wet and startled. I kept your voicemail greeting saved. The one that says, you've reached Liv, leave a message unless you're selling something, then definitely don't. I listened to it on the nights I almost called. Livia set the mug down. Show me. He pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, scrolled to a voice memo labeled simply L. He pressed play. Her own voice, younger, laughing, filled the kitchen. Julian's eyes never left her face while it played. When it ended, he whispered, I have 312 of them. One for every month I was too scared to dial. She crossed the space between them in 3 steps and pressed her forehead to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her like she was made of glass and he was terrified of breaking her again. They stood like that until the rain stopped entirely. Eventually she spoke, muffled against his shirt. I want to hate you forever. It would be easier. I know, he said into her hair. I'll let you hate me every day if you'll just let me stay close enough to earn my way back. She pulled away just far enough to look up at him. The boys come first. Always. If you disappear again? I won't. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing the stitches above her eyebrow. I'll tattoo their names on me if I have to. I'm not leaving. A small voice from the hallway. Mommy? Lucas stood in the doorway wearing one of Julian's t-shirts that hung to his ankles, hair wild from sleep. He rubbed his eyes. I had a bad dream the car crashed again. Julian moved before Livia could. He crouched and opened his arms. Lucas ran straight into them, burying his face in Julian's neck. "It's okay, buddy," Julian murmured, rocking him gently. "Daddy's got you. The car's gone, but we're all safe. Promise?" Lucas peeked over Julian's shoulder at Livia. "Can Daddy sleep with us? So the dream doesn't come back." Livia's throat worked. She nodded. Julian carried Lucas back to the guest room where Noah and Ethan were already tangled in blankets like puppies. He climbed onto the big bed fully clothed, arranging the boys around him. 3 small bodies instinctively curled into his warmth. Livia stood in the doorway watching, arms wrapped around herself. Noah mumbled sleepily, "Mommy, there's room." She hesitated, then toed off her shoes and crawled in on Julian's other side. The moment her head touched the pillow, Ethan's arm flopped across her waist, anchoring her. Julian reached across the boys and found her hand in the dark. Their fingers laced together over 3 sleeping hearts. For the first time in 5 years, no one was alone. Hours later, when the city was asleep, Julian whispered into the quiet, "I used to dream about this exact moment. Then I'd wake up and hate myself for wanting it." Livia squeezed his hand. "I used to dream you came back and begged. Then I'd wake up and hate myself for still hoping you would." Silence, softer this time. She continued, voice barely audible. "I kept one of your shirts. The gray one you wore the day we found out it was Triplets. I slept with it under my pillow until the scent was gone. Then I just kept the pillow." Julian turned his head on the shared pillow, eyes shining in the dim glow of the nightlight. "I still have the hospital bracelet from the day they were born. It's in the safe with their trust funds. I used to take it out and wrap it around my wrist when the loneliness got too loud." They looked at each other across the small sea of their children. "I'm here now," he said. "I know," she answered. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Outside, dawn crept pink and gold over the skyline he'd once thought was everything. Inside, 5 tangled hearts beat in the same rhythm for the first time ever. And it sounded like home. When was the last time you let someone hold your hand in the dark even though you were still scared? Share your moment below. Someone reading this might need permission to reach out tonight. The morning light was gentle, almost kind, when the elevator chimed at 7:12 a.m. Julian was in the kitchen making pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, terribly lopsided ones, humming off-key while the boys cheered him on from their perches on the counter. Livia leaned in the doorway in one of his old college t-shirts, hair messy, eyes soft from the first full night of sleep she'd had in years. The elevator opened. Reginald Whitmore stepped out flanked by 2 lawyers and a private security guard. Julian froze, spatula mid-air. Reginald's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Julian, we need to talk. Now." Noah's dinosaur pancake hit the floor with a wet splat. Livia moved instantly, scooping the boys off the counter and behind her. "This is not the time." "It's exactly the time," Reginald snapped. He tossed a thick folder onto the island. It landed with the weight of a guillotine. Julian opened it with dread. Photographs. Dozens of them. Livia leaving the hospital last night in his arms. The boys asleep against his chest. Headlines already written. Hawthorne heir's secret family destroys Whitmore wedding. Architect's love child scandal could tank $400 million merger. Then the legal documents. A restraining order drafted against Livia, accusing her of orchestrated harassment and attempted extortion. A petition to freeze Julian's assets pending investigation into fraud, because the trust funds he'd shown her last night were structured in ways that could be spun as tax evasion if you paid the right people to spin it. Reginald didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You have 24 hours to fix this," he said calmly. "Sign the new NDA. Pay the woman whatever she wants, 10 million, 20, I don't care, and get her and those children out of the country. Quietly. Or the board votes you out Monday morning and I personally see you bankrupt and disbarred from ever practicing architecture again." He glanced at the boys who were clinging to Livia's legs, eyes huge. "Cute kids," he added like an afterthought. "Shame if their father ended up in federal prison." Julian's world tilted. Livia's face went white. "You can't." "I can," Reginald said. "And I will. Cassandra is devastated. The family is humiliated. This ends today." One of the lawyers placed a pen on top of the documents like a loaded gun. Julian stared at it. The boys started to cry quietly. Ethan whispered, "Daddy, are the bad men taking you away?" Julian looked from the pen to his sons to Livia, beautiful, exhausted, proud Livia, who was shaking her head almost imperceptibly. "Don't," she mouthed. "Don't you dare choose them over us again." But the math was brutal. If he fought, he lost everything: the firm, the legacy, the power to protect them long-term. 10 years from now the boys might hate him for being poor because he'd chosen pride today. If he signed, he kept the empire. He could pay for the best schools, the best doctors, the best life. He could visit them in whatever country they hid in. Maybe even rebuild something later when the storm passed. He had done this calculation once before. He picked up the pen. Livia made a sound like a wounded animal. Julian's hand hovered over the signature line. Noah, brave, stupidly brave Noah, broke free from Livia's grip and ran straight to him. He grabbed Julian's wrist with both tiny hands. No, Daddy. You promised? You promised this morning when you kissed my forehead you'd never leave again. Ethan and Lucas followed, piling against Julian's legs, sobbing. Julian looked down at 3 tear-streaked faces that were his own face in miniature. And something inside him finally snapped, the last chain his father had forged. He dropped the pen like it was poisoned. No, he said. Reginald's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said no. Julian's voice was quiet steel. Take your merger. Take your board. Take every brick I ever laid. I'm done. He turned his back on them, crouched, and gathered the boys into his arms. Reginald barked, You'll be ruined by Monday. Julian didn't even look up. Then I'll be ruined. But I'll be ruined with my family. Livia was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Reginald made a disgusted sound. You're throwing away everything for the only thing that was ever mine, Julian finished. He stood, still holding all 3 boys, and finally faced the man who'd once been his future. Get out of my home. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Security looked at Reginald. Reginald stared at Julian for a long beat, then shook his head. You'll beg me to take you back when you're living in a studio apartment and those kids are asking why they can't have new shoes. He turned on his heel. The elevator doors closed on his parting shot. Enjoy the fall, Hawthorne. The second they were gone, Julian's legs gave out. He sank to the kitchen floor, boys still clinging to him, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Livia dropped beside him, wrapping her arms around all 4 of them. For a long moment no one spoke. Just the sound of 5 people breathing the same terrified air. Then Julian whispered against her temple, voice shattered. I think I just burned my entire life down. Livia pressed her lips to his jaw, tasting salt and fear and pancakes. Good, she whispered back. Now we get to build a real one. But the look in her eyes, half gratitude, half terror, said she knew exactly what this choice had cost. And for the first time Julian did too. What did you finally refuse to sign away, even when it cost you everything you thought you wanted? Tell me the moment you chose love over fear. I need to know I'm not the only one who's ever been this scared. The penthouse felt hollow after the elevator doors closed on Reginald Whitmore. Julian stayed on the kitchen floor long after the boys had been coaxed back to the living room with cartoons and leftover pancakes. Livia sat opposite him, knees drawn up, watching the man she once loved try not to fall apart. His phone started vibrating at 8:03 a.m. and never stopped. First the board chairman. Then the CFO. Then journalists. Then Cassandra, one voicemail, just her crying, then hanging up. By 9:15 the major papers had the photos. By 10 o'clock the stock of Hawthorne Architects had dropped 12%. Julian turned the phone face down and stared at the marble like it might open and swallow him. Livia broke the silence. We should go. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. Go where? Anywhere but here. My apartment. A hotel. Another country. I don't care. This place is about to become a circus, and the boys don't need to see you destroyed on every screen in the city. He laughed, a cracked sound. You think I still own this place after Monday? The board will seize everything that isn't nailed down. Then let them have it. She stood, extended her hand. Come with us now, Julian. Right now. Before you talk yourself into crawling back. He stared at her hand like it was the last rope off a sinking ship. I have nothing left to give you, he said quietly. No empire. No protection. Just me. Broken, unemployed me. Livia knelt again so they were eye level. You never had an empire to give me. You had a choice. You just made it. Don't undo it now because you're scared of being poor. He swallowed hard. I'm scared. I'm terrified. I don't know how to be a father who can't buy his kids the world. You start, she said, voice fierce, by being the father who stays. Julian closed his eyes. When he opened them they were wet but steady. He took her hand. They packed light and fast. 3 small backpacks for the boys. 1 duffel for Livia. Julian threw a few t-shirts and his passport into a grocery bag because every suitcase in the penthouse had his company logo on it. The boys thought it was an adventure until they saw Julian's face. Noah tugged his sleeve in the elevator. Are we running away, Daddy? Julian crouched, smoothed Noah's curls. We're running toward something better, buddy. I promise. The lobby was already swarming with photographers. Julian pulled the hood of his hoodie up. Livia did the same with the boys' jackets, and they slipped out a service exit into an alley where a single black town car waited, driven by Marcus, the only employee who'd answered Julian's call this morning. Where to, boss? Marcus asked, voice thick. Julian looked at Livia. She gave the address of the tiny apartment she'd raised the boys in. The one with the leaky faucet and the neighbor who played saxophone at 2 a.m. Julian repeated it like a prayer. The drive took 43 minutes. 43 minutes of Julian watching the city he'd conquered slide past the window while his old life burned behind him. When they pulled up to the tired brick building in Oak Ridge, he stared up at it like it was a palace. Inside, the apartment smelled like crayons and laundry detergent and home. The boys ran straight to their toy corner, shouting about showing Daddy their bunk beds. Livia started coffee with the cheap machine that took 20 minutes to brew. Julian stood in the doorway, grocery bag in hand, feeling like an intruder. Livia handed him a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Mom." Sit, she ordered softly. He sat at the small table that wobbled on one short leg. She sat across from him. The silence stretched. Finally he spoke, barely above a whisper. I keep waiting for you to tell me to leave. I keep waiting for you to decide this is too small for you and walk out. They looked at each other across the scarred wooden surface. I'm not walking, he said. I'm not kicking, she answered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the hospital bracelet from the day the boys were born, faded blue plastic, tiny beads spelling baby boy A. He set it on the table between them like an offering. I want to earn the right to stay, he said. Every single day. Starting with fixing that leaky faucet you told me about 4 years ago in a letter you never sent. Livia's eyes filled. She reached into the drawer beneath the table and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, creased from being read too many times. She slid it across to him. It was the letter he'd written the day he signed away his rights. The one from the pile last night. She'd taken it when he wasn't looking. I kept this one, she said. Read it when I thought I couldn't keep going. I hated you and I needed you in the same breath. Julian's hand shook as he touched the paper. Outside, cameras were probably already gathering. Tomorrow the world would watch him fall. Inside this 1,200 square foot apartment, he made the only choice that still mattered. He pushed his chair back, walked around the table and knelt in front of her, not dramatic, not cinematic, just a man on linoleum with nothing left but truth. Livia Moreau, he said, voice steady for the first time all day, I have no ring, no empire, no plan. Just me and these 4 years of regret I want to spend the rest of my life making up to you and our boys. Will you let me stay? Not as the man I was. As the man I'm finally ready to become? She cried then, big ugly sobs that shook her whole body. The boys came running at the sound. Julian opened his arms and they piled in, 3 small bodies and one woman who had carried them all alone for far too long. Livia pressed her wet face into his neck and whispered the word he'd waited half a decade to hear again. Yes. What was the moment you finally chose the harder, truer thing, even when it felt like jumping off a cliff? Tell me below. Your story might be the rope someone else needs today. 18 months later. The little house on Maple Crest Lane smelled of coffee, crayons, and the faint cedar of fresh sawdust. It was nothing like the glass penthouse that had once carried Julian's name in steel letters 40 stories high. It was better. Julian stood at the kitchen island in worn jeans and a t-shirt that read, Triplet Dad, 300% exhausted, 1000% happy, flipping blueberry pancakes while 3 6-year-olds argued over who got the Mickey Mouse shape. Lucas called it first. Noah insisted, standing on a stool so he could reach the batter. Ethan licked the spoon, that means he forfeits, Lucas countered with airtight kindergarten logic. Livia walked in wearing Julian's old Yale hoodie, the one she'd stolen back when they were 23, and kissed the top of each curly head before sliding her arms around Julian's waist from behind. Morning, handsome, she murmured against his shoulder blade. Morning, wife, he answered, tilting his head so she could reach his lips. They still said it like that, husband, wife, like they couldn't quite believe the words belonged to them. The simple gold bands on their left hands were new, only 6 weeks old, bought with the money from Julian's first honest paycheck in years. The wedding had been 20 people in their backyard. The boys wore clip-on ties and carried the rings in a wooden box Julian carved himself. Livia walked down an aisle of scattered Legos and dandelions, barefoot, in a second-hand lace dress that cost less than one of Cassandra's bridal napkins. When the minister asked if anyone objected, Noah shouted, I do. I want cake. And everyone laughed until they cried. Now Julian turned the burner off and faced her fully. Mail came, he said softly, handing her an envelope with a gold seal she recognized. Whitmore Development Group. She raised an eyebrow. Should I be scared? He shook his head. Open it. Inside was a single sheet. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, after review of the revised proposal submitted by Hawthorne and Sons Family Architecture, the board is pleased to award your firm the contract for the new Lakeshore Community Center and Children's Wing. Your focus on affordable, human-centered design was exactly what this city needs. Congratulations. Reginald had signed it himself, a scrawl almost illegible with what might have been grudging respect. Livia looked up, stunned. This is the $400 million project they pulled from you. Turns out when you build playgrounds for low-income neighborhoods instead of penthouses for billionaires, people start trusting you again, Julian said, grinning like the boy she'd fallen in love with a decade ago. And when your wife is the most brilliant community designer in the Midwest, they beg you to take their money. She swatted him with the letter, laughing. Hawthorne and Sons was 6 people now, Julian, Livia, 2 junior architects who believed in their mission, a part-time bookkeeper, and Marcus, who'd quit the Whitmore empire the same day Julian did and now drove the company van, bright blue with a hand-painted logo the boys had designed. They weren't rich. Not even close. But the mortgage was paid, the boys took karate on Tuesdays, and every night Julian came home with paint under his nails instead of panic in his chest. He still woke some nights reaching for her, terrified it had all been a dream. She still kept that first unsent letter in her nightstand, but now it lived next to a new one he'd written the morning after he chose them on the kitchen floor. My loves, yesterday I burned everything I thought made me a man. Today I woke up richer than I have ever been because I woke up next to you. Thank you for letting me come home. Forever your daddy, forever your Julian. The back door burst open and the boys tumbled in from the yard, muddy and triumphant, dragging a red wagon. Daddy? Mommy? Look. In the wagon lay a battered for sale sign they'd clearly yanked out of someone's lawn 2 streets over. Noah beamed. We fixed the world. Ethan held up a can of white spray paint like a trophy. We crossed out the F and wrote an L. Lucas turned the sign around proudly. It now read, For Love. Julian and Livia stared, then at each other, then lost it completely, laughing so hard they had to sit on the floor while 3 proud little criminals climbed into their laps. Later, when the pancakes were eaten and the sign was quietly returned, after photos of course, Julian carried the boys to the big bed for their nap. Livia followed with books. They read The Very Hungry Caterpillar twice, then Goodnight Moon, then the one the boys loved most, the photo book Julian had made of their story. Page 1. Mommy alone with 3 tiny babies. Page 10. Daddy looking sad in a big empty building. Page 20. The rainy day Daddy came back. Last page. All 5 of them on this very bed, squished and smiling with the words, and they lived happily ever after, for real this time. When the boys finally slept, Julian and Livia slipped out to the porch swing. Spring air smelled like lilacs and possibility. He pulled her close, tucking her under his arm the way he did every single night now. Still yes? He asked quietly, the question he still needed to hear sometimes. She turned her face up to his. Every morning I wake up and choose you again. Still yes. Forever yes. He kissed her slow and deep, the kind of kiss that held 5 lost years and 1,000 found ones. Inside, 3 little boys dreamed the safe, certain dreams that only come when you know without question, that both your parents will be there when you wake up. Outside, the man who once sat his family in the back to hide them now held his wife on the front porch for the whole world to see. And the world, for once, looked away and let them have their quiet, hard-won, perfect peace. They had lost everything that didn't matter. They had found the only thing that ever did. Love at last. If you could go back to the moment someone walked into your life or back into it, and everything changed, what would you whisper to your old, scared self? Drop it in the comments. Let's remind each other that second chances are real, and that choosing love is always, always worth it.